In this video, we're going to learn about perpendicular lines in the coordinate plane. So the first thing you need to know is that perpendicular lines have negative reciprocal slopes. So what this means is the slopes are going to be flipped and negated. So we call it negative reciprocals. So a reciprocal means you flip a fraction, and negative means you're going to negate it. So I like to think of this as we're going to flip and negate. So they're not going to be the same slope, because if they had the same slope, then they'd be parallel. Perpendicular, they have to have negative reciprocal slopes. So let's look at some examples of what this actually means. So example 1, they give us the two slopes. So they're saying M1 and M2, meaning the slope of one line and then the slope of another line. And we're trying to determine if they're perpendicular or not perpendicular. Remember, this symbol here represents perpendicular. So if I look at this first one, the slope is equal to 2. Remember, this is really like saying 2 over 1, because 2 divided by 1 is 2. So 2 is the same thing as 2 over 1. So if I compare these, they are flipped. 2 over 1 was flipped to become 1 over 2. But they're both positive. So since one of them's not a negative, it means that they are not perpendicular. They're not flipped and negated. They're just flipped. If we look at the next one here, we have a negative 1/2. We have 2. Remember, that's the same thing as saying 2 over 1, since 2 divided by 1 is 2. So in this case, these are flipped and negated. Since this one's negative, it became a positive. It means we negated it. So in this case, they are perpendicular. Example 3, so 4, think of that as 4 over 1. So 4 over 1, if you flip it, would become 1 over 4. If you have a positive, you negate it, it becomes negative. So yes, those are perpendicular. Number 4, we have a negative and a negative. So since we have a negative and a negative, it means that they can't be perpendicular because they're the same sign. They have to be opposite signs to be perpendicular. Even though the fractions are flipped, not perpendicular because they're both negative. The next one, though, one's positive, one's negative, so we negated. And they are flipped, the fractions, so that means they are flipped and negated, which means they're perpendicular. And the last one here, 1 is kind of a unique situation, because if you think about 1, well, I could really write it as 1 over 1, because 1 divided by 1 is 1. And if I have negative 1, I can write that over 1 as well, because negative 1 divided by 1 is negative 1. So really, I negated the positive 1, so this positive 1 became a negative 1, and I flipped it. You just can't really see it, because 1 over 1 is the same thing as 1 over 1. And the negative sign's out in front, so these would be perpendicular. The next set of examples here we're looking at, so instead of just giving us the slope, we're given the equation. So remember, if you have an equation of a line in y equals mx plus b form, what you want to look at for the slope is going to be that m value, the number in front of x. So if the equation is not in y equals mx plus b form, that's the first thing you need to do so that you can compare the slopes. So this time they're not giving us the slopes, we have to find them first. So the first two are pretty straightforward because they're already in y equals mx plus b form. So I'm just going to compare the numbers in front of x. And when I compare the numbers in front of x, this 3, think of it as 3 over 1. They are flipped, but they are not negated. They're both positive, so since they're the same sign, they're not going to be perpendicular. If I look at this next example, the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to rewrite these because they're not in y equals mx plus b form. So to get this into y equals mx plus b form, I'm going to subtract x from both sides. So I have 8y equals, and you want to put the x first so it's in y equals mx plus b form. So it'll be negative x minus 4. Divide everything by 8 to get y by itself. So it becomes y equals, this is really like a 1 in front of x, so it's going to be negative 1/8 x, and then this would reduce to negative 1/2, because you could divide the top and bottom both by 2. Then we do this side, subtract the 4x from both sides. So don't forget this negative that's in front of the 2, that stays. Negative 4x will come in front, and then plus 10, so it's in y equals mx plus b form. Divide everything by negative 2. So we have y equals, a negative divided by a negative will become positive, so this will become positive 2x minus 5. So now if we compare the slopes, this one has a slope of 2, this one has a slope of negative 1/8. They're not even close to being the same or flipped and negated, so we're just going to say not perpendicular. It's not even the same numbers. And then the last one, we're going to do the same thing, get it into y equals mx plus b form first. So first thing you're going to do is subtract that 4x from both sides. So we have negative 2y equals negative 4x plus 6. Divide everything by negative 2. Again, notice that I kept that negative out in front of the 2. That's really important. So we end up with y. Negative divided by a negative is going to be positive, and it'll be positive 2. And then this will be negative 3. Move over to this equation. So I subtract 2x from both sides because I'm trying to get y by itself. So we have negative 2x plus 6. Divide everything by 4. So we have y. This is going to be a negative because it's a negative divided by a positive. This will reduce. If you divide the top and bottom both by 2, you'd get 1/2. You could put that into a calculator if you needed to. So it'll be 1/2 x. And then the number at the end will just be reduce that, divide top and bottom by 2, so you get 3/2. Compare the slopes. So we have a negative 1/2 and we have a 2. Remember, this is like 2/1. So flipped, it is flipped, and it is negated. This one was positive, it became negative, so yes, they are perpendicular.